lung protective stuff with it. So there's a couple different ways to explain it. One is it's a pressure-based mode. So you can think of it as either pressure control with inverted inspiratory and expiratory times with very short expiration and a longer inspiration. The other way you can think about it is CPAP, just continuous pressure with intermittent releases to get some ventilation. And then one of the benefits that have been said with it is that it's actually a little bit more comfortable for the patient than you may think. You may think that, hey, I breathe in and hold my breath and then release and then breathe in really deep again, that may be uncomfortable. And while it's not physiologic to how we breathe, you can also try it out and take a deep breath in for a few seconds, hold it, quickly release, and then breathe in again. And you'll notice that you don't get that air hungry feeling by doing that. So in the same way, even though it's not naturally how we breathe, it's not overly uncomfortable for the patients either. And one of the benefits to that is you're needing less sedation, needing less paralytics, and helping the patient not get all those after effects from all of that. So like I mentioned, pretty much the physician's going to want to go into it kind of as rescue therapy a lot of times. So there's a few different things that we said on here. Easy one is FiO2, always going to start at 100%. And then after that, you're setting your P high, which is the pressure at the deep breath in. You're setting a P low, and that one's easy to set. That's always going to be 0. There's no reason for it to not be 0. You want them to ventilate and exhale all the way. And then you're also setting the time that you're at the high pressure and the time you're at the low pressure. And again, T low is one of the easier ones to set. That for the average patient, it's going to be about 0.5 seconds that they're going to need to have that quick release. You don't want your T low too long because then you're defeating the purpose. If they're exhaling for a long time, you're losing all the recruitment that you're doing, and it just defeats the purpose. And then having a T low too short, you can have a little bit of air trapping to go along with that. So you don't want it too short, you don't want it too long. 0.5 is about the average for most everyone. COPDers may need it a touch longer. Interstitial lung disease or fibrotic lung disease with some restriction may need it a little bit shorter because their lungs are going to want to elastic recoil really quickly. All right, and then kind of jumping around a little bit. So with your P high, that is the pressure you're setting to try and recruit the patient up, which is essentially what you're trying to do with this. I usually start right around 30 because that's the P high is basically the equivalent of your plateau pressure if you're in a control mode. So when we try and do lung protective strategies for ARDS and even non-ARDS patients, the goal is to keep plateau less than 30. So by setting your P high at 30 right at the very beginning, you're guaranteeing that you fit into lung protective strategies. And then also, you may need to adjust your P high a little bit higher or a little bit lower, and that's going to be based on your needs for oxygenation and ventilation. Increasing your P high, you're going to you're gonna have higher pressures in the lungs, basically trying to recruit more lung. The more lung you recruit, the more oxygenation, the less VQ mismatch, and the better your oxygenation should be. And you also need to pay attention with that because your ventilation is going to be, one of the ways your ventilation is based on your difference between P high and P low. In the same way, you change it with IPAP and EPAP. On a BiPAP, you increase the distance between the two, you're going to get more volume in, leading to better ventilation and exhaling out. And then your T high is the last one, and that's mainly the one you're going to play with when you need more ventilation, because basically by setting your T high higher or lower, that's adjusting your respiratory rate. The respiratory rate that you have on the monitor itself is not going to be reliable to what their actual respiratory rate is, because they can still take small breaths when they're at P high and everything like that. So really paying attention to the minute ventilation is going to help you gauge what you need to have your T high at, and based on the CO2 that you're getting on your gas. So I usually start out at somewhere between like 4.5 and 5.5, because you really want to have a long T high to really recruit everything up and keep the oxygenation up as much as possible. But the byproduct of that is that you may lose some in ventilation. So that's pretty much where you're going to have to adjust your T high to get your CO2 back to where you want it. So let's see. And then the last couple that we don't use very much, but you may in near future, is your pressure support above P high. And that's more for when you're starting to wean someone a little bit, they're starting to take some more breaths on their own, and you're looking to decrease the P high some, but allow them to still ventilate by taking the breaths above and beyond on their own. And then, so, one of the big issues that I think has come up has been making adjustments based on our blood gases, and all the physicians are going to be a little bit different, but in general, if you've lost ventilation, you're hypercapnic in this, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to take them off and put them back in either volume control or PRVC or whatnot. Most of the time, you can solve that problem by going down on your T high. And to fix your oxygenation problem, more often than not, you're going to have to go up on your P high, because that's the main driving factor to recruit lung up, to decrease your VQ mismatch and improve your oxygenation. And then I know at least some of the doctors, after they get through kind of that acute portion, they get the hypoxia under better control, you're getting down to 50 or 60% FiO2, that they'll just switch modes altogether and put them back in a control mode. But really one of the beauties of APRV is that you can actually wean from that. So like I mentioned, it becomes almost CPAP basically. And you can give them some pressure support above P high, and then they can start taking their volumes on their own. when they are doing all of their spontaneous breaths on their own, the transition from there would be from APRV to pressure support CPAP, because now they are doing the ventilation on their own, and you just start slowly coming down on their CPAP more and more, or their pressure support, and eventually it gets to an extubatable point when you get down to 8 or 5 of PEEP at that point, and they're taking adequate volumes on their own. Also, titrating, I personally like to come down on FiO2 first, and then once you get down to that 50% or so, and that's when you'll start coming down on your P high, lengthening your T high to get it as close as possible to that CPAP level for further weaning. Let's see. Any questions?
For sedation, you still looking at something like Precedex or something?
When I first started, at least with these COVID patients, most of them are kind of in some deep sedation at first. And you bring up a good point. It doesn't matter whether they're just very lightly sedated or deeply sedated. The mode works for both.
Okay.
It works when they're paralyzed. It's just a matter of whether they're doing some of the ventilation on their own or not. If they're deeply sedated or paralyzed, you are responsible for all of their ventilation. When they're a little bit more awake and taking some breaths on their own, then that's when you can start kind of stretching some of the your T high out a little bit, because they're doing some extra ventilation on top of what you're giving them. And so that helps with the weaning process a little bit more.
How long would you leave them on BiVent just to see if it's going to be successful? I mean,
So some people, it truly takes hours, like upwards of 10, 12 hours to see how much you're actually going to recruit. So probably upwards of 10 to 12 to 24 hours to see how much of the lung is actually recruitable. And one of the problems with these people right up front is that you're really only getting volumes of 300 to 400 or so. And so you do have to go maybe a bit higher than you'd like with your P high to really recruit stuff up, or you just shorten your T high a little bit to make sure that you get the rate you need to still ventilate. But really, the benefit of it, you shouldn't see like this magical improvement within 5 to 10 minutes. Most of these people, it takes a long time for them to recruit up.
And when changes are made, do you suggest waiting at least an hour to get the blood gas? Or does it depend on the patient?
I'm a little fidgety about my blood. After putting them on it initially, then yeah, you definitely need something probably about an hour, because if you don't match your minute ventilation to what you were doing before, you do have the risk of making them really hypercapnic. But really, if you're matching the minute ventilation and you have a SAT monitor, that you can kind of guess what it's going to be, and even have it, most of them will have end tidal too, and you can kind of guess where you're at. But when putting them on initially, definitely, and if you're making kind of significant changes, then would probably check too. I don't think so. If you're coming from 70% to 60%, I don't think it's going to help you very much. And even if you're going from a P high of 32 down to a P high of 30, and I don't think that's gonna have a huge difference too. But if you notice that you were really hypercapnic, your PCO2 went up to 100 and their oxygenation wasn't great, then yeah, by shortening your T high and increasing your P high, if you're doing multiple things at once, and if they're that critical that their numbers are that bad, then yeah, about another half hour to hour after. As long as you realize the oxygenation port may lag a little bit behind. What else you guys got? Come on back for round 2 on Thursday.
Aye.